So welcome all to our NCCSE webinar for April. Our topic tonight is going to be supporting ELs in a CS classroom. And we're going to talk about how to do this and some strategies for doing this in relation to the CS Awesome course for AP CSA, as well as Mobile CSP for the AP Computer Science Principles course. All right. So this meeting or webinar is recorded. So feel free, if you don't want to be in the recording, to turn off your camera. And we also have the live transcription is turned on, so you can hide or show the subtitles as you would like. If you have not had the chance to meet me yet, I am Pauline Lake. I am the Curriculum and PD Coordinator for the National Center for CS Education, and I work primarily with both Mobile CSP and CS Awesome at the center. Tonight, we're joined by several presenters who will be sharing their expertise on supporting ELs in CS classrooms. We have with us tonight Art Lopez. Art is a high school teacher at Sweetwater Union High School in San Diego, California. And he is also the 9 through 12 representative for CSTA's Board of Directors. So if you are familiar with Computer Science Teachers Association, hopefully you are a member and part of that great community. We also have with us tonight Andrea Wilson Vasquez. She's the Director of Educator Training for Code Savvy, and also a CSTA leader as well in Minnesota. Thank you to Art and Andrea for joining us tonight. If you have questions for them as we go through the night, you are welcome to put them into the chat. We also receive questions as you registered through Zoom, so we have those, and we will touch on most of the questions that you've had in the presentation tonight. I am going to hand it over to Andrea, who is going to give us a presentation on English learners in the classroom. So, Andrea, I'm happy to control the slides, or I can give you access to.
No, that'd be awesome. If you don't mind controlling the slides, that works great for me. Perfect. Thanks, Pauline. Hey, everybody. Great to be here with you tonight. And wanted to start off actually with a quick agree or disagree question. And feel free to just type in the chat, or if you'd like to, you can use the Zoom like yes or no responses. That's okay too. But just kind of a quick question for you. Do you agree or disagree, yes or no, all teachers are language teachers? What do you think? I see yes popping up in the chat there. A couple of yeses. I see a yes using the Zoom yes button. Awesome. Very cool. So yep, I've got quite a few yeses coming through, and for the purpose of this session, I am glad to hear you say that, because I definitely agree. There are a lot of ways that all teachers are language teachers, and it's really important to think of ourselves as language as well as content teachers, because actually academic language, according to academic language researchers such as Jeff Swears, who's highlighted on this slide, really believe that academic language is so important that it is one of the key factors that can affect the achievement gap between high and low performing students. So let's keep that in mind kind of as we're thinking about computer science language, as we're thinking about ways to support English learners in our computer science classes. Kind of how does that language come to play in our day-to-day classes? Thanks, Pauline. Next slide. So I had a link at the very beginning of our slides asking for some CS vocabulary. If you'd still like to weigh in, I'll drop that link in the chat one more time. But just, it's important to think about, since we have agreed all teachers are language teachers, including computer science teachers, what are some of the ways that language shows up in a computer science classroom? And when you think about some of the vocab out there in computer science, it really is both specific and also could be words that are applied elsewhere in different meanings that then take on a new meaning in a computer science class. So it really is a complex language system as we think about kind of the words we use in computer science. So on the next slide, let's take a look at some of the words that this group and a group of coworkers that I was working with earlier also weighed in. So let's, if we don't mind, Pauline, clicking on that Menti results, let's take a look at some of the words that we decided in our group here are vocab words that appear often in computer science. It's always fun to crowdsource and see what comes up. So algorithm definitely comes up, iteration, parameter program, lots of things, right? But even things like keyboard and loop, yeah, absolutely, function, recursion, lots of really important computer science vocabulary words. So I think we're all in agreement now. We've kind of got to the same page that all teachers are language teachers. So I want to dig in just a little bit more to what that really means. And one of the ways we're going to do that is by taking a quick look at some different language domains. So back on our slides, I have kind of 4 language domains identified, and these are in the world of English learners. These are very well recognized. So if you were to talk to an EL teacher, or if you yourself are an EL teacher, you know that there are kind of 4 components that we can divide language into. And for those of us who are computer science teachers, we can kind of take comfort in knowing that they're divided into input and output, some concepts that we're familiar with. So the input domains of language are listening and reading. It's the ways that we are taking in new language. And then the output, on the other hand, is speaking and writing, the ways that we are sharing information or sharing language. And I wanted to do one more crowdsourcing activity here to gather some ideas about how those different language domains might show up in an EL classroom. And so I'm going to drop the link to a Jamboard in the chat here. And I would just be curious to know, as you're thinking about a computer science classroom, maybe yours or your colleagues or one you've observed, what are some ways that listening, speaking, reading, and writing show up for your students or show up in your class on any given day? So for example, I'm thinking about, reading, when we're having students read through tutorials. And that might be listening as well. I know Mobile CSP has some really excellent tutorials out there via video. And so that listening and reading might be kind of listening to or watching a tutorial to get the handle on something new. So I'll give just a moment or two to folks who are interested to drop a sticky note on our Jamboard. And if you're not familiar with Jamboard, it's just kind of a virtual whiteboard. You can use a sticky note, or you can use an image or a pen tool to add some ideas, and any ideas are welcome there.
Andrea, do you want us to do it on frame 1 or frame 2?
Oh, thanks. Good question. Let's go on frame 1. Right on top of that image is perfectly fine. I'll go ahead and drop mine on there as an example. Listening to or reading a tutorial. So again, thinking about students and the ways that, oops, sorry, I just grabbed somebody else's sticky note. There we go. Oh yeah, love it. I see an idea there, reading code to debug it. That makes me think about pair programming, and that's a big example of output, maybe through speaking. Yeah, I see another idea coming in there. Students write code together on real.it and then annotate their code on Jamboard. Love it. Writing comments to explain how code works. Yes, absolutely, that annotation. Got another vote for pair programming. Awesome. Yeah, reading content to learn terminology and syntax. Absolutely. I think too about students who are engaging in the create task now, or very soon here, and how whether it's the speaking explanation part or the written part, there is a lot of output that happens in that create task. Lots of great ideas coming in here. I want to open it up. Does anyone want to speak a little bit more about an example that you dropped on the Jamboard here? Tell us a little bit more about what you've added or how it really aligns with one of these language domains.
I will go ahead. Nobody wants to go ahead.
Thanks, Art. Go for it.
I think we have a really great online textbook provided by the CSAM group by the National Center for Computer Science Education, and it is a full-on textbook and incorporates interactivity, which is awesome in the space as we're trying to teach the concepts of AP CSA.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. Those textbooks are a great example of input. And any class discussions you might have about what they're reading is that output, right? That's where students get a chance to speak about or to write about some of that language. Great. Well, thank you again for adding some ideas here. And thank you for considering how language, another way that language appears in our computer science classes. So we're going to jump back to our slides now, and there will be further opportunities for interactivity. So keep your ideas coming, and please know that your perspectives and questions and ideas are welcome here. We're a small group, so feel free to jump in as things come up for you. So now that we kind of have identified the different domains of language, let's just think a little more closely about who English learners are in the US and in our classrooms. So we know that English learners across the United States make up about 10% of K-12 public education. That's a little bit of an older statistic. I think we're a little closer to 11 now. That one was from 2017. But kind of keeping that in mind when you think about the makeup of your computer science classes and the enrollment that you might see. In terms of language background, when I was an EL teacher, I don't know if I shared that. My teaching license is in EL. I have my master's in English as a second language, and by way of co-teaching, fell in love with computer science and have now since done more computer science teaching than I have EL teaching, but still have a passion for EL for sure. And the first question that people would often ask me when they heard that I was an EL teacher is, so what language do you speak? What other language do you speak? But EL teachers don't often or don't always speak another language because we have so many different languages represented in our classes. Spanish is the most widely spoken native language by ELs in the US. However, I'm curious to know, do you have a sense for your school district or your kind of community? What other languages are prevalent where you are? Feel free to drop those in the chat. Just to kind of get a sense that many languages are represented, many backgrounds. Absolutely. Yep, I see Somali, Hmong, Karen, Arabic. Yep. Definitely. And then it's helpful to kind of know which language groups your students represent in the case that if you do have pockets of students who speak the same native language, the same home language, that pairing students together to do some work in their native language can also be an opportunity. Just a further stat here to think about is that the average graduation rate for ELs, at least back in 2015, 2016, was 60% compared to 84%. So I want to just remind us back to that initial quote from Jeff Swears, thinking about the impact of academic language. And that if we're not explicitly focusing on and supporting students in both the input of academic language and the output of academic language, that achievement gap is not going to get much better. So that is really important to consider. On the next slide, I wanted to just highlight, this is some more recent data from the 2020 Code.org State of Computer Science report that they put out last October. There are a few states that have started to keep track of EL participation in computer science courses. And so Code.org has helped to compile that information. And in the graphic, you can see that of the states who reported ELs in their computer science classes, the average state population of English learners is 11.2% in this case, but those enrolled in computer science courses, that only represents 5.6%. So this makes me think a little bit about the CAPE framework. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but I have a graphic on the next slide, just in thinking about the many barriers that English learners could face when trying to enroll in a computer science course. So we want to think about kind of what is the capacity for teaching English, teaching ELs within computer science. What's kind of the capacity out there for computer science education for our teachers? Are courses offered for computer science in schools where there are high EL populations? the participation, are students able to enroll? Are there scheduling issues where EL classes are scheduled at the same time as the CS classes are offered? Or in lower grades, are the EL pullout groups happening at the same time that grade school classes might be doing computer science work? And then the experience, which is something that we're going to focus in on in the next part of our webinar here, is what is it like for English learners in a computer science classroom? Once they've gotten there, how can we make sure that they feel represented, heard, and that they can participate fully in our classes? So with that, I want to pause just really quick and see if there are any questions or comments so far. That's some important information, but also kind of a lot to throw at you. Okay, we'll keep questions, or will we be able to share this PowerPoint? Yes, I see Pauline nodding yes, we will definitely be able to share it. We can also maybe share contact information at the end in case any follow-up questions crop up. Happy to field those as well. Cool. So let's take a little look at, so thinking about the experience of English learners in our computer science classes, what are some strategies that we can employ? This is by no means an exhaustive list, and I just want to highlight a few general strategies and how they might look in mobile CSP is the course that I'll be highlighting, and then Art will also be highlighting CS Awesome in a little bit. Okay, so let's take a look. Some really important strategies and important resources can be found first and foremost on the inclusivcsteaching.org website. It's an amazing kind of compilation or a curated list of various resources, including those specific to English learners. The English learner resources can be found under the accessibility tab. So after today, when you're trying to figure out kind of what your next step might be, that's definitely a good resource to check out. And I can drop a link in the chat so that you've got easy access to that. Oh, I see Pauline already did it. Awesome. Thanks, Pauline. Cool. Okay, so when we're talking about general strategies for supporting English learners, what sorts of strategies are we talking about? And when I think about it, I think of four main categories. So first off is that experience piece, right? We want to make sure our students feel welcome and heard and represented in our classes. We all know that if you're not feeling welcome or heard or represented in your class, it's hard to engage, right? It's that kind of affective filter. And so culturally relevant pedagogy is the first and foremost, the top thing that I think is important to focus in on. Followed closely by thinking about that language input. How can we make sure that the language that students are taking in is easily comprehensible, is kind of available to them in a variety of formats and supported in a variety of ways? And then how do we ensure that students have meaningful opportunities to produce language, that output, the speaking and the writing? And that final piece is, I think, sometimes a thing that gets overlooked easily in the classroom. I know in my classroom, I've been guilty of this because of timing, is the reflective piece. How do we make sure that we have an opportunity set up for students to do some metacognitive analysis of their own language use and development? So kind of that reflection, self-reflection piece. So I want to just take a couple of moments in the next few slides to highlight some strategies or some resources for you as you're thinking about how to integrate those different categories of support. This video is available to you as well. We'll skip it for now, but I want you to know that it gives more in-depth resources and ideas. So that's available to you through our Inclusive CS teaching resources. Okay, so the first category to think about is that culturally relevant pedagogy. When we're thinking about culturally relevant pedagogy, again, we're thinking about ways that we can ensure that both our classroom and the system in general is set up for our students to feel welcome, to feel validated in their experiences, and to feel heard and represented in our classes. So when I think about this, you can go on to the next slide, Pauline. One thing I really think about is how to lead with an asset-based approach. I think sometimes when I'm talking with school counselors or when I'm talking with my colleagues about wanting to make sure that ELs feel welcome in our classes, the first question that comes up is, well, won't they have a hard time because they don't speak English or they don't understand English very well? And I can understand where kind of it's easy to fall into that deficit mindset, but think about the assets and the contributions and potential that our English learners bring from the linguistic perspective, from the cultural perspective, experiential, social, and emotional perspective. And one resource that I want to point out, if you're looking for some lesson plans and a lesson planning framework to think about kind of this asset-based approach, is Sarah Vogel and her team's work through PILA CS. I'm going to drop the link in the chat there. Some really great examples of ways to lead with culturally responsive topics, culturally responsive teaching lessons, and to bring students along in that process. The other piece that I want to mention with thinking about culturally relevant pedagogy is to find a framework or to find, lean into maybe some equity work that your district is doing already. So for example, on this next slide, I have some resources through NCWIT, the National Center for Women in Information Technology, and they have a really great framework that the nonprofit I work with leans into a lot, called the Engagement Practices Framework. Again, your district may use something else, so kind of explore what's out there and how you might lean into it in terms of filtering that through your computer science class. But the NCWIT Engagement Practices Framework really hones in on how can we ensure that our content is relevant, including interrupting stereotypes as they come up. How can we help students to build their confidence and professional identity in computer science classes, including connecting with and having regular kind of communication with industry representatives who represent a variety of backgrounds, and growing an inclusive community. And this is things like having intentional opportunities for student collaboration and interrupting or mitigating stereotype threat as it comes up. So a really great resource to consider, but again, kind of lean into an equity framework and think about how that filters into your class. I want to highlight a couple of strategies next that focus in on language input. And so when we think about language input, again, we're talking about listening and reading. And the most important thing I want to highlight here is, instead of maybe the tendency to simplify academic language or to dumb it down, as I think has sometimes been a tendency when thinking about complex topics and English learners, instead of doing that, we want to really more focus in on amplifying our language. And what I mean by that is to anticipate places that students might have difficulty understanding or difficulty accessing the language of the class, and to lean in with some scaffolding. So if a student might have trouble understanding some vocabulary words, to do some explicit vocabulary teaching ahead of time. Or if comprehension might be an issue, to think about how some guided notes might be a possibility. So to really focus in on amplifying some academic language versus simplifying. The list that I've got there is, again, by no means a comprehensive list of strategies, but I do want to highlight a couple of them and kind of the ways that they show up or will show up soon in mobile CSP. So on the next slide, I've got an example of some content and language objectives. So the content objectives are things that we're all, I think, fairly familiar with. It's kind of the skill or the task that we're asking students to show mastery of by the end of our class. And the language objective is set up to help not only structure kind of what language the student might be asked to produce, but also for the teacher to think about, how might I support the students in accomplishing this language objective. So in this case, describing the importance of pair programming using target vocabulary, supporting details and examples. So just to keep in mind, okay, so I want to make sure I have that target vocabulary pre-taught or supported for students. I want to make sure that I have maybe some sentence starters to help students to understand how to provide supporting details and examples. So that language objective is just as helpful for the teacher as it might be for the student. Speaking of explicit vocabulary teaching, you may consider using a graphic organizer such as concept maps, which is shown on the next slide. This is something that will be layered into mobile CSP vocabulary, kind of student vocabulary notes. We're working on that now. But something like a concept map is great because it helps students to identify relationships and connections between important words and concepts that they're learning. So it could be used especially as you are asking students to kind of show what they know after learning some words. The last input support I wanted to highlight is called sentence deconstruction. So this is thinking about complex texts that students have to read and understand, think about as students are kind of trying to understand what the create task is asking in mobile CSP or in AP CSP, for example, and trying to break down what do those prompts really mean. So in sentence deconstruction, we can take a complex sentence and just chunk it into kind of meaningful pieces, and then pause after each chunk to process or to discuss with students what we gathered from that chunk, what it might mean, how else we might rephrase that, or kind of what it connects to. So in this case, I might ask students, okay, so we've got this sentence here. Every algorithm can be constructed using combinations of sequencing, selection, and iteration. Let's focus in on that first chunk. Every algorithm can be constructed, and talk through with students, what does that mean? Let's remind ourselves, what's an algorithm again? Like what connections or what examples can we think of? And then we move on to the next chunk. So just a way to really process through especially complex sentences or like those create task prompts. All right, we're gonna take a look next at output. If any of those input strategies sparked an idea or really resonated with you, feel free to drop that in the chat just to kind of make a note of it as we're going, and we'll just keep those in mind. So as we're thinking about output, we're really honing in on speaking and writing. And the most important thing to me here to mention is that we're really looking for repeated and strategic, those iterative and supported opportunities for students to express complex ideas. So how can we not only provide one opportunity for students to speak, but for students to speak maybe that same idea or a similar idea more than one time so they can practice and hone their language. So again, I've got a list there, but I have just a couple to highlight on the next slide. I've got some sentence frames. So these are, again, just a way to provide some support for a student so they know how to start off a sentence, but the real meat or the idea in the sentence is provided by the student. So kind of breaking down questions or prompts so that students have kind of that ramp or that runway to help get them started in that first part of the sentence, and then they can provide or fill in with their idea. Another output support that's really present in mobile CSP is the POGL activities. So it's a structured collaboration activity where there are different roles for students. And what I love is the mobile CSP curriculum has the prompts or some help for students, again, in the form of sentence frames. So students know what might be expected of them, what kind of language might they use as they're fulfilling each of those different roles. Structured collaboration like this is also really awesome because it provides, it helps to provide equity of participation, equity of voice, so that students know kind of what their role is and how to fulfill it. The last activity for output I want to point out is one called Paraphrase Passport. This is a fun one because it gets everyone in the class participating, and it can be done in distance learning or virtual learning as well as in person. So in this activity, there's a given prompt, and then the first person shares their idea, and the next person to go has to summarize the person before them, their idea, before sharing their own. And then it just continues on so that everyone has a chance to both summarize and then share. And all of those ideas that can then be collected to create like a collective answer bank. So you've got kind of some ideas that, that could be crowdsourced, which is always kind of fun. I've got one last area to highlight, and then I'm going to pass it over to Art to talk a little bit about CS Awesome. So this last piece is the piece that, again, always in at least my experience, I run out of time to talk about with students and in presentations too sometimes. But that's that support for metacognition and self-reflection as students are developing their language. And so one structure for that works really well is on the next slide here, a word ranking. Kind of just a pre, I wouldn't call it a quiz, but just a word ranking kind of pre-activity and then post-activity. So before a lesson or a unit, asking students to rate how familiar they are with a set of words. And then again, after that unit or activity, asking them to rank again. Just gives them a chance to really think about which words do I still need to dig into. The final activity I want to mention with regards to reflection is giving students the chance to not only reflect in writing, but to also use a recording tool, something like Screencasting or Flipgrid, so that they can both have practice listening to themselves talk and probably repeating themselves talking, because I don't know about you or your students, but myself and my students included, we often take more than one take as we're trying to record something. And so it gives them that repeated practice as they're considering challenges or successes that they had in that given activity or lesson. So kind of a whirlwind as I talked through some both general and specific examples for supporting English learners, but I want to now pass it over, I believe, to Art to talk a little bit about how that translates into CS Awesome and some other content. So with that.
Gosh, thanks, Andrea. You are amazing. I got the chance to meet Andrea through the National Center for Computer Science Education. And they were the first ones to let me know about the work you were doing. And it is incredibly impressive. I learned so much. You were so kind to let me share a lot of the resources you provide. And I've been spreading the word around the networks that I have, and I just think this is awesome, Pauline, that you're doing this. It touches my heart, because this is where I'm really close to that, to something very personal for me. So I'm going to talk a bit about equitable and inclusive teaching practices. I'm just going to let everybody know that I work with my colleague Osvaldo Banuelos, who's good. I'm going to let him take over in about hopefully 1 minute. I basically grew up as a teacher on the border between Tijuana, Mexico, and San Diego in Southern California, and we have large populations of English language learners. And a lot of the kids, I grew up in very similar situations. I grew up in San Isidro, which is right on the border. And I remember the challenges of learning different languages. And so I'm really empathetic to kids that are trying to learn things as they're trying to learn another language. And English is very difficult. It is daunting. It's one of the hardest languages you can learn. And so I got involved in computer science education with my colleague and really good friend, Dr. Beth Simon. She works at the University of California, San Diego, and she was the first one to engage me in computer science education and the importance for kids. She has provided me many equitable and inclusive teaching practices. And these are the ones that are listed on the slide deck, and you can explore these more. And I've used all of these. And what's really great is that CS Awesome for APCSA teaching Java programming includes many of these different types of inclusive teaching practices. They call it out. I think it's amazing. And that's why I really, really like using CS Awesome, because it's integrating and embedding EL pedagogy and trying to get our English learners the opportunities to take these kind of high level courses. A lot of English learners don't have these opportunities due to their schedules, but the fact that this is trying to engage them to take these kind of classes is pretty amazing to me. So that there's use, modify, create, peer instruction, problems, Parsons problems, teaching, debugging techniques. But the big thing for me is always scaffolding. If you go to the next slide, Pauline, for me, I really appreciate it. There's always collaboration. That's what I love about computer science courses. It really gets kids to work together to solve problems. We're really looking also at inclusive and culturally relevant programming lessons and activities. I think when I have the populations that I teach, we really try to engage where they're from. There's some cultural aspects to their programming. It brings it alive to them, and they really want to get engaged with it. The other thing that I really think she's taught me well on some concepts in computer science ed, Beth has, is the hidden curriculum. She identifies that as, just realize that computer science ed is relatively new in the way we teach it as compared to so many other subjects areas. We've been teaching mathematics for centuries. We've been doing computer science ed for a few decades. So one of the things she really tells me is, you know, we're still learning how to teach this effectively and efficiently. So I try to come across as trying to teach kids to read code before they write code. That's how you learn languages as well, I believe. And trying to really be explicit about what you want kids to learn. Saying all that, if you can go to the next slide, Pauline, I'm going to introduce a rock star teacher from my district. He's been doing amazing work, and he's going to show you the use of Perusal that Beth introduced this to us. And so without further ado, I'm going to let Osvaldo Banuelos take over.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Thank you for having me. If you could please click on the slide deck so we can get started. All right, so I mean, the name of the presentation that I've done before is supporting literacy and student-centered social learning spaces. It's kind of a mouthful, but hopefully I'll make sure to define why it's the case. Next slide, please. All right, so Beth Steinman in her course through UCSC Extension presented these 3 questions, and I'll read them to you as you read along. Do you ever feel like your students just skip the text and jump directly to the activities? I definitely did. Do you have concerns about how they're understanding the text and even if they're doing the reading, right? And finally, are you looking for ways to support student learning that might be asynchronous, right? Next slide. And so here's kind of the emotional piece. The research on reading is kind of scary. So turns out that 9th graders are reading more than high school seniors, and this happens over the course of their education. By the time they get to college, they're reading even less. If we can please go to the next slide. So again, only about 20 to 40% of the students are doing the assigned readings. And when you get this slide deck, you can click on the link. It's a very nice article and it has links to all of the research. But the key thing here is that I think that we really want our students to be reading, but we don't have an efficient way of making sure that they do it that's fun. And so we end up having to, create these reading quizzes, which are kind of stressful for students, especially English learners, right? Because essentially we're asking them we're assessing them on something that, they're barely able to read and, barely able to understand. And so I think that what I'm about to show you with Perusal is a very safe environment where they can build confidence and develop a lot of the language skills that are, described in the ELD California standards, for example. Next slide. All right, so I think I'm just going to stick to the slide deck so that we don't have to be jumping around back and forth from my screen. So what you see here is, essentially what Perusal looks like. On the left, you see the textbook, which is AP CS Awesome. And the cool thing about Perusal is that you can physically highlight the text. And when you do that, a little field pops up here on the right where students can type in a comment, a observation, a question, or a wondering in a very, like I said, a very low stakes environment. Usually in the classroom, there's a certain amount of status involved with saying anything, right? Either the teacher is going to pick you and all of a sudden everyone's eyes are on you, or you're raising your hand because you kind of feel very confident. And there's a continuum in between there, but especially for English learners, that is very stressful. And as we know from cognitive science, when student is stressed out, they're essentially not going to learn anymore. Their brain has gone into a fight sequence, and there's all types of chemistry going on in their brain, and they're not learning anymore. So in order to address that, we are engaging students in these social learning spaces, which, like I said, are very low stress. And so let's take a quick look at it. This student highlighted this text right. It's talking about, storing variables in memory, or how you assign things. And then the student, says, just like math, the values have to be equal no matter the variable. There's a conversation happening here. I don't want to, directly read through it, but you're welcome to do so. But what I'm kind of trying to show you here is that students have the option to anonymize their comments if they want to. Over time, students will not anonymize themselves. It'll actually lead to students developing their professional kind of persona, which is very important to learners, especially English learners. If we look at the example on the bottom, we're looking at assignment dyslexia, whereby a student asked a question, and then I was able to respond to the question with a link to a Replit file so that the student can see an example of what I mean. And so it's very dynamic in that sense. I could also link a video in the comment section. And so I think this is very powerful. In addition to being able to highlight text and then write a comment, when students are reading the APCS Awesome lesson, they're able to click on specific sentences which are highlighted for them, which means that someone has already added a comment. And so for English learners, this is amazing, right? Because essentially it allows them to see what their fellow classmates are thinking about a specific sentence or a specific word. And this is essentially peer instruction. It's a very, there's different levels of peer instruction. It's maybe not as structured as something you would see in a synchronous classroom, but it gives them the confidence to maybe post something themselves. Next slide, please. All right, so there's also obviously a high ceiling. So for example, this student highlighted constants are traditionally capitalized. And so the student posted the following. He said, this makes me wonder about how coding best practices are standardized. I have to imagine, so on and so forth. And so getting students to make assumptions is, at the very top of Bloom's taxonomy, right? It's showing that the student is thinking about a concept and then taking it to the next step and trying to figure out why it is that that's the case. And so then I was able to respond, yes, best practices are also known as conventions. And then I provided a link to the Oracle website where all of the Java conventions are listed. And so in that way, I was able to kind of start a conversation that's very high level with the student, all in a social learning environment where all students get to benefit from our interaction. So normally in a classroom environment, maybe a student will ask me personally a question like this, I would respond, and then no one else would get to benefit from it. And so in this case, everyone gets to benefit from this interaction. It should also be noted that students who are engaged in social learning environments like Perusal are more likely to have active opinions when we do meet in a synchronous space. And so a lot of the opinions or examples that I've heard from other teachers who use Perusal have stated that students build confidence over time because they're able to float ideas without the status and the stress of in-class dynamics. And so, that's also an interesting bit. Next slide, please. So you're probably thinking, well, can you only upload text, and how do you do that? Well, you can directly upload a file or a link like CS Awesome by providing just the URL and pasting it in. Or you can upload a PDF. You can even link a YouTube video for students to annotate. And it's actually really nice the way that works. So instead of just having your students watch something, you can make sure that they've watched it and made sure that they've engaged with it by having them annotate the video. In this example, a student is asking what happens if you use reserved words as a variable name. And just because let me just clarify it. The fact that there's a question mark in the comment automatically lights up that orange question mark. If another student is reading the text and has a question about, you know, why someone highlighted this, they can read the text, and if they have the same question, they can click on the question mark, and then that'll inform me that, hey, you know, many students have the same question. And so again, this provides them confidence over time. It makes them part of the community, and so over time they feel like they're part of you know, the classroom. And I think that's a big issue with English learners who over time develop a sense of you know, trying to be invisible, right? So this was really interesting because, as you can see, you know, I think I responded by saying, try it in Replit. You know, I'm trying to demonstrate, trying to coax them into, you know, establishing some practices where if you have a question about something, try it in the code to see what happens. That is ultimately what I wanted to see. Another student jumped in and said, hey, you know what? I typed out the code. Here's an example. Click on it so that you can see what will happen if you try to use a keyword as a variable name, for example. And so this is another great example of peer instruction, and this happened organically. Like I said, this happened just because the student felt like, hey, you know, I feel like I can share this information with my classmate, even though the other student was anonymous. In addition to that, you'll notice that there's a green check mark in the example by Devin, and I was able to upvote it, and that informed my class that those are the types of practices that I want to see. And it's very specific. It isn't the type of thing where I used to do as a novice teacher, where I would celebrate students just because they were A students. In this case, I'm celebrating a very specific practice that I want to see students replicate. And it should also be noted that peer instruction can result in 3 times the learning gains because it's providing, you know, instruction at their own level by someone who just learned the material, which is obviously kind of going to make more of an impact than, you know, a teacher who has learned the material for some time now. Next slide, please. All right, so here's some other examples of how I have used perusal, which is not really the traditional use case. In this case, I went into Google Docs and I created this document that you see here at the center of your screen. And the assignment was for students to create a BuzzFeed quiz. We were talking about conditionals. And so I essentially created, you know, 25 boxes, and every student had to highlight a group number and tell us what question, what BuzzFeed quiz they were going to code. In addition to that, they were asked to describe how their code made use of variables, control, and modularity, which are the competencies for the course. And finally, they were to provide a link to their code on Replit. And so here you can see that, you know, a student posted their code, and then you know, students were able to say, hey, I ran your code. It was really interesting. It was really funny. And again, this builds camaraderie. It builds community. But it's also a really interesting way of getting students to use the vocabulary. And I think that you saw in the previous examples that students are constantly using the vocabulary in a way that feels very natural because they can see the vocabulary to the left, right? It's not like a discussion board where they're trying to remember what the textbook was talking about. They can see it, and so it's very easy to pull vocabulary from the text directly into their what they're writing. Next slide, please. All right, so this was another example of something that I tried. It's called a choice board, and it stems from Gardner's multiple intelligences, which pretty much, you know, the theory is that, you know, if you can explain things in all of these multiple ways or fields, then you really understand something, essentially, right? And so this specific choice board was for iteration loops. And I was asking students to think of different ways in which loops might appear in these different domains. And so I started off by talking about music, and I described how I personally think that the music of Philip Glass exemplifies the use of loops to great effect. Other students jumped in and talked about, where they see loops being used in nature. In this example, they talked about, photosynthesis, or the circle of, the circle of life. I don't know, that's probably not the exact way to describe it, but in the intrapersonal domain, students talked about how, when you're depressed, you kind of keep thinking about things over and over again. And so it really opened up the topic of iteration beyond the walls of just computer science. And so I think these are spaces where cultural, inclusion can occur. And prior knowledge and prior experiences can really be elevated and celebrated. Next slide, please. All right, so this is just a quick summary. I don't want to maybe read all of it, but I'll maybe point out a few key things. You can definitely facilitate these social annotations. Something that I didn't show because I didn't get to go into the app itself, but all of the annotations that you saw on perusal are automatically being graded, right? And so if you were to provide a text in Spanish, it'll also grade the annotations automatically. It'll do it in French as well. The app will even read the text to the student. So if they want to hear it instead of just read it, that's also a possibility. Remember also that they can watch videos and annotate those as well. You can also upload podcasts. Because every single annotation is tied directly to a piece of text, it's very easy for the program to produce something that's called a confusion report. The confusion report is essentially all of the questions that students had that weren't answered. And so I flipped my classroom. And so when we get into the classroom, the first thing I address is the questions that students had. And this really, I think, helps students develop a sense of ownership over the course, because instead of me picking the questions and the concepts that I want to go over in class, it's the students and their experience with the text that guides the instruction. And I think that really builds ownership, and it makes them feel like they're really a part of the class. So again, what's the carrot? Why would students want to do this? Well, they're being graded for it, and it's done in a very efficient way for teachers. But in addition to that, I think students like to know that they're in a social environment, right? So if a student answers a student's question on perusal, they will be notified in their email, and they'll be able to respond if they want to within their email, in the same way that you would be able to maybe on social media. And so the upvote, the question mark, you can use hashtags, you can use @. There's a lot of social media features that I think students find very, just part of what they're used to. And so that's very helpful. Synchronously, like I said, there's a low barrier to entry, a high ceiling. Because every single comment is being recorded, essentially, it's very interesting to be able to address all of the misconceptions. In a classroom, you can only really hear a few conversations at a time. And so you miss out on what's happening in the classroom as a whole. And so if you're trying to understand whether or not your English learners are actually engaging with the material, well, then you would have to record everything that they write. And this allows for you to do it in a very efficient way. If a student, for example, is not engaging, is not writing annotations, well, then the intervention, the support can be helping the student with the sentence frames, for example, that we heard Andrea talk about a few moments ago. I think I've spoken to the other topics. Maybe we can move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so finally, we saw that the statistics show that students in college are not reading, and that as they get to high school, they're even reading less than, a 9-year-old or ninth grader, a 9-year-old rather. But in perusal, I've seen just with my own students that 90% plus of the students are completing the annotations, because I think of the fact that it's so low stakes and very, it feels very natural, very, it's just, it doesn't feel like a quiz, pretty much. And also the data that we get back is engagement data, which is, I think, very powerful. Many times when students are sitting in my classroom, it's hard to really understand whether or not they're engaged. And in this case, I know exactly what they're doing. I can see how much time they've been reading. So that's I think, useful data. Next slide, please. So once you get this slide deck, feel free to watch some student observations on using the program, as well as teacher observations. Next slide, please. And I've added some annotations that you would want to tell your students, these are the types of things I'd like you to see. You're welcome to use these. And then the next slide is things that you would likely not want your students to type in, things that are one-word comments, emojis that are maybe in social media, those things are more common, but in this space we really want to make sure that students are using academic language and set the tone early on that those are the expectations. But I think that you'll see that over time students will want to use memes to really elevate, but also bring in their world into how they understand the content. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is just, again, a summary with some nice links about how the annotations are actually graded. Next slide, please. You'll notice that at the bottom, there's actually a link to a demo perusal course for physics. If you wanted to play around with it, it'd be cool. Next slide. I don't think there's anything left. Okay, that's it. Well, so thank you very much. Hopefully you saw how literacy is supported in this space, and I'd be glad to answer any questions if they come up.
That is awesome, Osvaldo, as always. I don't know if you guys want to see some of this of Osvaldo's perusal course and him like looking at it right away. Just let us know. I'm a believer. I wasn't sure about this, but I think I'm recommending to all our APCSA teachers that are using CS Awesome. I'm just telling everybody, use this next year, because the one thing that Osvaldo's shown me is engagement and the fact that you can actually visibly check that kids are actually reading, and that's pretty amazing. So thanks, Osvaldo.
Yeah, if you want to check out a video where I actually show the perusal in action, you can check out the video recording there.
Yeah.
And I kind of go over the same things, but you actually get to see what it looks like live
in the classroom. Yeah. Osvaldo does this for our San Diego CSTA chapter, and everybody just went, yeah. So I'm giving a clap to both you and Andrea. You guys are amazing. And I guess we should go to the next part, Pauline. I don't know. Oh, cool.
I'm over here spotlighting the wrong people. Thank you as well, though. So this next part, I don't know how it's looking for others, but maybe I should stop screen sharing. We wanted to give you a chance, for those of you that are here, to hear a little bit more from Art as well and his experiences with working with ELs. So let's see if I can do this. Better. All right, I'm in speaker view now. Perfect. All right, so if you were here earlier when Art shared his introduction, he gave a little bit of his background, but I just wanted to have sort of like a conversation with you, Art, and kind of pick your brain on specific strategies that you have used and some experiences you have had. But first, just in case, if you wanted to share anything else about your background and your journey as a CS teacher, I wanted to give you that opportunity as well.
Yeah, I'll take about 1 minute just to say that I'm deeply grateful and appreciative that I started this journey about 11 years ago, because one of my students came up to me and said, "Hey, Mr. Lopez, why does La Jolla High School and Torrey Pines High School offer computer science courses and we don't?" And I said, "I don't know. That's a really good question." And both La Jolla High School and Torrey Pines High Schools are in privileged neighborhoods. And the district I work for has, at that time, 42,000 kids, grades 7 through 12. And I found that not a single one of the 13 high schools or 11 middle schools was offering computer science courses. And I thought, this is not right. And so I wanted to change that, and I had no idea. I don't have a computer science background. I took a programming course in 1980 at UC San Diego in Fortran with punch cards. It was dehumanizing. I never want to do that again. Especially when you drop all your cards. You got a program to. But I really wanted, I really think I met Beth through a colleague, and she showed me the work she was doing. She was working on the APCSP developmental team, one of the universities that started piloting the course. And when I went and saw what she was doing with the psychology majors, who many of them did not want to take that course and didn't realize the importance of computing in research in psychology, all of a sudden it just changed their perspective. And I said, you know what, we need to provide this for all kids. And that started my journey. And I work in an inner city school that has about 75% English language learners. Either they're 21% are English learners, and I think like 30 to 34% are reclassified. So we have a lot of them. And so I really wanted to change that and give every kid an opportunity to take a course like computer science.
Definitely. Was there a particular challenge, other than the fact that it wasn't offered and that was already a big hurdle? was there a challenge other than that stood out?
Yeah, it was it was, I thought it would be me not being able to teach it because I don't have a background in computer science. That wasn't the challenge. The kids helped me learn how to teach it. I mean, we worked together as a team together to learn about computer science. The real challenge was district leadership and people understanding the importance of computer science education for our children. That's been the big challenge. So when I started, 0 courses were taught. We started with 1 class, and I was very fortunate to have a principal, Roman del Rosario, that was so supportive. He started 1 class with 14 kids. He didn't shut it down, and then just helped me within our district build up this foundation. And I just had to talk to a ton of people and not come across not being condescending, people just don't realize in the spaces they're at how important computer science education. And the pandemic's been horrible. Everything that we've there's so many things that have just have not been normal, obviously. But one tiny sliver of silver lining, because that's all I don't even know if I could say that, because that's painful to think about all the tragedy that's occurred. But I think everyone now realizes the existence of the digital divide, and it's stark, and also the fact that computer science education, how important it is for not only our kids, but for everyone. So I'm hoping this propels our country to really changing that. I mean, we made some tremendous strides with Dr. Jan Cooney, who I was fortunate to have met and start. She was the one that changed the whole national landscape. She was the one that propelled this movement forward. But I think there's a lot of work left to be done. Only 4 out of 10 high schools are still offering computer science ed, and we're in a lot of brown and Black communities. It's not being offered, and women are still, there's still huge gaps. And so, but you try to go forward, and I think a lot of the work that curriculum providers such as CSAM, the National Center for Computer Science Education, is really important.
Yeah, we had, I think it's interesting you mentioned, the digital divide, because we have it in the course, but I in mobile CSP, I believe, the Without a Net, the digital divide documentary, if you haven't seen that, definitely check that out. And I thought it was interesting that, that was done, I think maybe 6 years ago now, but watching it in this time of the pandemic and the move to virtual learning, like it really, like, this hit home. Like, this is exactly what they were talking about in the documentary. We had teachers tonight who registered, and maybe those are still on the call, asking about virtual support as well. And we saw some of those earlier tonight, like the use of Perusal, for example. But obviously there's challenges if students can't even access that when they're at home, right? Was there a specific time that you worked with an EL student, maybe whether it's in virtual or in person, that stood out to you, it resonated with you? What did you do? How did you help and support them?
I've been fortunate. I when I first started teaching, I did it with the perspective that I wanted to be a bilingual teacher. So in California, you get a bilingual credential. It's called a BCLAD. So I've gone through a lot of training, a lot of background on how to teach children with different languages that are starting to learn English. And I speak Spanish, so it really helps me with the communities I work with. So it's not, for me, it's kind of like a lot easier because I could just talk to the kid in Spanish and explain everything. That's really helpful, quite honestly. But I had students from Somalia, students from Afghanistan, students from China, students from the Philippines. We have many different cultures and diversity in the school I teach at. But the one that just stood out 3 years ago, was a young man from Afghanistan. And he really wanted to take the computer science course. And I'm all inclusive. Yeah, sure, come on in. It's an AP class, but don't worry about that. Just try to do your best. And it was just an incredible challenge for the young person, and incredible challenge for me. The other person that comes to mind is this young lady from Somalia. She was really, they're both were at the same time were taking the class, and they were both incredibly challenged, because they barely just got here. Their English skills was minimal. They were in ELD1. So that was really hard. But what the great thing is, I was using block languages, and I surrounded the kids with that were also English language learners, but that were, maybe some levels above. And then, I try to mix and match using, the differing structures in cooperative learning. I use a lot of cooperative learning to try to help those kids leverage the other kids. And what ended up happening was we did a lot of visualizations. When we try to do the create task for the CSP course, the kids cannot, their writing skills were not, at that point for English were not there, but I told them, give it a try. So what, just, to use the words, use the vocabulary, do it in your own language, and then try to translate it and see if you can come across it. And they took the exam. They unfortunately didn't pass, but they told me afterwards, they said, I'm so happy I took it, because it gave me an idea of what a college test is like. I would never have known otherwise. And the other thing that says, they learned their English improved. I'm not kidding. Markedly, markedly. They could talk. They could not talk to me at the beginning of the year, and at the end of the year, they could make full sentences. They were using vocabulary terms from computer science. They knew what a list was. They knew what an algorithm was. They knew what an abstraction was. They can explain it, and they can actually create programs. We use a programming platform called Alice that we use, and they can make really cool stories about their culture, about anything that was interesting to them. And I think that the aspect of creativity and gaining confidence was just demonstrated with those 2 kids. I was so happy that they took those classes.
And that's great, Art. I know you mentioned that they didn't pass with the AP course. I'm just wondering, at your school, do you offer concurrent enrollment at all? And have you seen any success with that? With concurrent enrollment, meaning that similar to dual enrollment, they're still able to get the college credit, but they don't have that high stakes test at the end that they have to take. Do you have that at your school?
Yeah, well, it's nothing. We don't even call it dual enrollment. I mean, it's the course is called labeled APCSP, right? But
Mhm.
the score is something distinct and different.
Mhm.
They had passing grades in the course,
Right,
regardless of their score,
right.
but they couldn't get the college credit. So, but it was okay. I think the experience served them really well.
Well, for those on the call that do have, concurrent enrollment options at their school, that is another option if you are concerned about that with your EL students, to consider that if they're concerned that they wouldn't pass that high stakes exam, they can still earn college credit with concurrent enrollment. It's just slightly different what they're doing. So maybe to wrap up, Art, I think you have lots of great expertise and experiences. We may have some new teachers on the call. Is there a piece of advice that you would give to a new CS teacher that is working with EL students in their classroom?
We talk a lot about, I just do this, I think inherently, I think a lot of teachers have this inside of them. It's compassion, kindness, and thinking of the kids as being their own child and how you would want to treat them. That was the first piece of advice that someone gave me when I first walked into a classroom. Really great teacher. And that's what they told me. And I that has always stuck with me. And I think, the aspects of social emotional learning is so important. And I think creating a professional learning community within the scope of your classroom is a really important vibe. Inclusivity, really just getting to know the kids on a real personal level. It's been so hard in virtual environments. It's so challenging to do that. But I know when we go back in person, the one thing I would say is be really welcoming to the English learner. Value what they bring into the classroom. They have great gifts. All the kids do. And I think if you come from the point of view of believing sincerely that every child has a great gift to offer to the world, I think will serve you really well. I really believe in the terms of hope and love. And I try to use those terms. They're not terms, they're deep words that I use with my kids. It's hard to tell them I love them at the beginning. You gotta work your way through that, but the end, it's always, the kids can tell how sincere I am with them. I love them. I want them to do well. I think building that personal relationship is the most important part.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Art. Keep up the great work that you're doing there. If you have questions for Art, I'm sure he'd be happy to answer them in the chat. But we also are going to transition here to sort of our wrap up. And let's see here. I want to go back to sharing. And we take some time. Oh no. Did I click? There we go. To do some Q&A. So I don't know if others have been monitoring the chat, but if there are questions, please feel free to let us know. Feel free to unmute, turn on your camera if you would like, and we can have some Q&A. As we get gear up for that, I just wanted to, in case anyone has to jump off, I do want to leave you with a special announcement that we have regarding mobile CSP. If you are currently using mobile CSP, you know that we are hosting our course on Google Course Builder. Google is no longer supporting Course Builder, so we have been looking into other learning management systems. And we are super excited to let you know that this summer we are moving to Runestone Academy. So if you have been using CS Awesome, you've been using CS Awesome's Runestone ebook, we will be putting mobile CSP materials up on Runestone and have an interactive ebook. So both mobile CSP and CS Awesome moving forward for the 2021 school year will be on Runestone Academy. We will announce some trainings that we will do for our current mobile CSP teachers who are unfamiliar with Runestone to come and learn and see what that is like and how to set up the instructor dashboard and everything. And so I think it actually might make it maybe easier to also use mobile CSP with Perusal when that happens as well, because since we've seen the success that that has had with CS Awesome. So I'm super excited to make that announcement. Again, thank you all for joining us. We're sticking around if you have questions. Let's chat.
Pauline, good to see you again. But
Hi.
the mobile CSP, do you need a phone? Is it like an app inventor?
Yes, so we use App Inventor, and we do recommend that students use either an Android device, or now it also works on the iPhone and iPad as well.
Okay.
But there are emulators that are available that students can use on their device. There's also the Chromebook has a capability to act both as the place where they develop and test. But I do think it's nice from what I've seen in my experience when the student has their own personal device, like their cell phone that they can use, they really like it and they like that engagement and they can take their work and show their family and friends. So we definitely recommend having a device if you can, but if you can only use a computer, that works too. It's very exciting.
And Yvette, thank you for your resource.
You're
It was,
welcome.
I shared that out with a lot of people. It was really good. That really was the teachers Google group for CS Austin. It's pretty cool. People,
Yeah, like that group. Yeah, I was
yeah, it's a
hoping.
good group.
Yeah, I was hoping to a little bit expertise the first half of Unit 9 with her video.
It was good.
Thank you. I guess the Perusal cannot be used for English learners when their English is so limited, so they can't read much. It's after a certain level, maybe level 3 or something.
You know what? That's kind of interesting. Yeah, you know, ideally, you know, we would be able to get APCS Awesome in the target language so that they can develop the literacy and the vocabulary in their home language, and then they can transfer that knowledge over to English as they develop the English. And again, Perusal does auto grade in Spanish and French and a few other languages. So I think there's something there that I think can definitely work. But I mean, if you have videos that you use that are, you know, not language specific necessarily, they're more like, you know, performative. I know there's a lot of great videos where, you know, they're using manipulatives to show, you know, the way that object references associate to things. And I think that you can upload the video or you can link the video on Perusal and then have students annotate in their home language so that at the very least, you're letting them know that their voice is important and that sharing their opinions is important, regardless of the language it's in. And then being able to record it gives you the opportunity to give them credit for it and to say it's important, it's valid, and keep going, you know?
Yeah, I think I've been working with Pauline and John on the CS Awesome team And I would really like to let people know about using Perusal with CS Awesome. I think it would help.
Yeah, I thought it wasn't free. I watched the Beth Simon's videos. I don't know, somehow I thought it wasn't free, so I didn't use it.
Yeah, no, it's 100% free.
Yeah,
The
it's
only
good.
reason why you would have to pay for it is if you're a college professor and you want to have your students read a book. Normally they would go and buy the book right at the bookstore, but here they would buy it virtually so that then they can annotate it. But in this case, you know, CS Awesome is a, you know, publicly available. It's part of the Commons, and so we're able to upload the PDF, and that's why it's free. It's the only, like I said, just to repeat, the only time anyone would have to pay is if you're using copyrighted materials.
I'm gonna end the recording.